Hi there, welcome to SupraFiend's first video update on DeanFun's 85 PType restoration project. Normally we make forum posts from celicasupra.com for all this, but we've been so busy we haven't had any time for that, so I'm going to try and cover everything that's been done in the last 10 months in a quick little video thing here. It's really not going to be quick, I'm going to blabber for a bit, but if you like that sort of thing, you should find this interesting, if you like these cars. Really quickly, I'll get through the boring stuff, just the body work. In terms of rust repair, what's been done since the thread was updated last. We stripped the whole front end down. Fenders are all off, whole front end was apart, and glass was out. Of course, there was rust in the usual areas here. But 3 layers of metal we had to go through, plus some underneath the hinges and under the hinges on the door as well. Nothing too major, but did require a little patchwork there on both sides. Always a bummer. Then one thing to be really careful with these cars is this panel here. This seam right under this here is totally exposed on the inside. And this is basically the sewer system of the car, which is constantly water running through it. There's little drains on the sides. These little things here, there's actually bare metal under them. You get rust starting there, and then it'll spread under the entire strip. Don't believe me? Have a look. This is that same panel taken off of an actual rusty Mark II Supra. You can see how rust will spread there. So anybody whose car is still good, I would highly recommend you check that, make sure it's good all the way underneath, and then seam seal the shit out of that seam in there so that you don't get that. Take your glass out though and get everything perfect first. We also had rust around this vent, which is the intake into the cabin. At one point in time there may have actually been some kind of filter in there, but it's long since gone. You get it a little bit kind of under this edge going all the way around. Of course, on any normal Mark II, you don't have access to this. This opening here is a replica of what the very, very early 82s had. Only a few of them actually came with this. There's a little plastic panel that goes over this. So I made a template, replicated it. Now we have full access to clean up all this area in here. Very handy. I kind of recommend it, but you got to make sure to seal this properly, or otherwise you'll get a leak going right into your heater cord, or not your heater assembly, which is probably why they took out that access panel in the first place. Rust-wise, we also had the seam sealer along this seam here tends to get really crappy from all the heat from the roof and sun. And we had rust going all the way in here, just not super bad, but this whole seam had to be opened up, peeled, rust cleaned, put back down, welded up, resealed, all that. It's a pain in the ass and very common again. Most cars you're going to find have that, unfortunately. And then battery. Everybody's familiar with how the battery mounts rust from acid from the battery cooling down. So the whole mount came out. It was all cleaned underneath it. It wasn't too bad. The real problem is, you see that little dot right there? That is another layer of metal inside the frame rail, and it's not sealed. So when you get the acid sitting on top, it just works its way into the rail. It goes all the way through it. So we had just enough in that rail that I knew it was going to become a serious problem one day. So we sectioned that rail. You can kind of see one of my access plugs here. The whole rail was cut right. You can see that little bit there where the bodywork's not 100%. From there forward, the entire rail came off, except for the outer side. There's a thinner metal on this side of the plate. And then it was cleaned completely in a vat of Metal Rescue Vaporest. Sat in there for a week, ate all the rust out from in between the metal plates inside the rail, and then cleaned, painted, primed, welded back on. All these little access holes are to deal with the weld seams from taking it apart and putting it back on. Same here and there, so everything is perfect. Will never rust again. Okay, enough of the boring stuff. Let's get on to the motor. So obviously stock 1JZ with stock twins. early 1J. Nothing too fancy with the motor itself, just standard exhaust and intake upgrades. The intake pipe is actually from a Subaru cold air intake I had sitting around. It's the right diameter and cut in the right place, made the perfect intake for this motor. Attaches to the bottom of the IC piping there. Nice and solid. It's an AEM dry flow. It's freaking huge, but it actually doesn't touch anything. The clearances are dead on. I made all the piping for the IC system out of Vibrant C and J bends. You get this like combo ones. We use like 3 of them in all. They're 2.5 inch, 304 stainless, 16 gauge. Would have loved to have gone to 18 gauge, but really damn hard to find. Green line clamps, Vibrant silicone. We went through the stock opening just like the 7M stuff because, I don't know, it just kind of came out this way nicely. It was convenient, didn't have to make an extra hole in the bottle and the body. It comes through here, and there's one pipe that's bolted to the car, so either end can be removed for easy access. And it goes through there, goes through there. Nice little rubber fitting so it doesn't scratch anything up. Into the Vibrant intercooler. It's 6x24, 3.5 inch deep. So it's a nice and thick one. We basically just wanted to have all the air coming in through the upper grill, just go straight through the radiator, no heat loss or heat picking up heat from the IC. So this completely optimizes the openings in the stock bumper. The stock bumper fits over all this perfectly without any modification at all too. And then it comes around here. All the clearances are super, super tight. It took a long time to get these bends just right. And through there, and through there, and then up into the throttle body. We shortened the battery mount. It looks like a factory battery mount pretty much once you take the battery out. Same stock tray even, and bent all the corners and made it look stock. Generic battery, you can get this battery any parts store in the world. It's just a standard size. Yeah, and everything worked really good. So you can see down there, AC lines are in. We're running full AC on this car. We actually managed to make these lines using the top half of the fittings that came with the 1JZ compressor, and fitted them at a AC shop. Built us custom lines basically fitting the stock Mark II ones to the 1J ones. It was actually not a big deal though, about 80 bucks. Power steering, it's all RA64 lines from the Mark II rack. And this is the 1JZ reservoir, I think, came with that motor. It's pretty simple to fit all that. No modifications at all. The power steering was all bolt-in, including the cooler, which was also off the RA6 Celica, and we ran it right through the little foamy thing that the AC lines go through. No contact in there and the hard stuff. It's all good. Fan, we're running the Flexolite. It's not called the 210 anymore. It's like the 410 or something, the newer model. On a Griffin Rad. Since it's a Griffin Rad, they're built to work with the stock rad or fan and everything. So you normally have to trim these rad or fans down to fit on these rads, which sucks. Instead, we cut the rad and we took the little bracketry off here so that it fits nice without cutting up the thing, and get a nice seal everywhere. I even used the metal I cut off to build the brackets that actually mount the thing to it, so that turned out pretty nice. There's a wiring harness that goes under the car that's part of the chassis wiring now, and it goes to it goes to the thermostat in the bottom of the rad, and then up back to relay up here. Basically wired right off the box too, so it's with a fuse and everything, so like stock. We moved a few things around too. We stuck all this junk from here to get it out of the line of sight. Cleans it up a bit. We put our igniter there, MSD, got rid of some junk in there. The cruise control sits right in front of the brake bias valve. In there, it's just not installed right now. That's about it for engine bay. Let's get on to brakes and suspension. Kind of my specialty. You can see we got the T3 camber plates, obviously. There's an LGM bar as well, it's not installed. Alright, so we've done a fair bit of work in here. This is the original SupraFiend coilovers that I documented in that huge god-awful thread. The exact same ones as used to be in my car, so some of those, my old suspension stuff came with it. But they've been rebuilt to 2.0 specs, so it's been shortened to the length of the new AGX MR2 shocks that are being run in it. We've also added this little reinforcement plate. Gives the whole unit more strength. I've also running the native brackets for the brake lines now too. With the LGM wires, it doesn't really matter if you have that bend in it or not. It's a different angle on those. I've also gone to 350-pound springs and running the T3 needle bearing top hats and camber plates. So things get interesting here. This car did have the Celica GTS steering arms on it. That's what we wanted to run, but of course you move the entire assembly in when you run those, and massive contact with the rotor and the control arms, so that was a no-go. So the only way to get shorter steering arms was to run the T3 arms, so we ordered up a set of those. Interesting note about them. One, they're actually steel. I always thought they were aluminum, but they are steel. I'm the guy who actually took the measurement for the distance from here to here so that T3 would know what length to make them at. So I don't know if Gabe ignored my measurement or if it was wrong or what. But these arms are way shorter than the Celica GTS steering arms, like a good half an inch. Right now, the way things are unaligned, our steering turns, lock-to-lock turns is 2.0. Like stock, it's like 3 something. So I haven't driven this car yet, but people aren't really complaining about it, so I don't know. It's way more ratio, way more ratio than stock though, so it might be too much. The other downside of that is you can't tell because the steering is changed or turned right now, but even when it's not turned, the whole tie rod is always arced in, even at static ride height, and you can't get rid of that, which means there's always going to be some level of bump steer with these arms. You're not going to be able to dial it out permanently. Whether it's livable or not, we'll just have to see once the alignment's done. But don't even think about using that hole. Just forget it. That hole doesn't exist. It's for lighting. That's all it's for. Think about it that way. So we accidentally ordered these with the tie rod ends. Since this uses a giant bolt to go through here, there is actually 2 versions of these arms. I was always wondering why you couldn't order the tie rod ends separately, and the reason is they don't fit the stock tie rod ends. If you order the arms without the tie rod ends, they have a tapered hole in them to fit the stock ball joints, or tie rod ends. We have actually no reason to run these at all. They provide no significant benefit in our application. I guess you could argue strength, but people aren't exactly breaking tie rod ends on a regular basis on these cars, so these weigh literally about twice as much as a stock tie rod end. Just throwing that out there. These weigh a little bit more, maybe just a hair, a couple grams more than the stock Mark II steering arms. They're definitely heavier than the Celica GTS ones. So RCAs, you probably wonder why the hell there's a stack here. In my last year, I've been on a quest to optimize my suspension geometry, get the last bit of speed out of my suspension. One thing I've realized is your RCA thickness, if it isn't basically exactly what your drop is, they're not doing much for you. They'll improve bump steer a little bit, but the way our suspension works with McPherson struts, control arm angle here, it has to be on a downwards incline at static ride height, or you don't get any camber gain. If your arms are parallel to the ground, you are not seeing any camber gain at all. And that is a 33mm RCA. It's the only one available on the market right now. And that gives you an 1.5 inch correction. So I think it's safe to say most people running coilovers have more than an 1.5 inch drop. I had 2.5 inch on my car. So what we did is we stacked them. This is actually the RA6 RCA, sent to us by accident actually, but it turned out for the better because they don't have embossing on the top, so they stack. The actual Mark II application will not stack. So if you order that guy, you can run something else on top of it, but your only options are 33mm RCAs. So we really need a variety of selections of thickness of RCAs. So anyways, that's a 25mm Jim King RCA from way back in the day. So now we have 2.25 inch correction, which is actually about our target drop range for the suspension. So hopefully that all works out. I had to order some custom bolts too. Not custom, but unique size. It was a pain in the ass to get. Obviously you can see the old chimpy Adco bars from way back in the day as well. And then of course the Jim King brakes with Coleman slotted and cross-steeroled rotors. Pretty standard installation there. Streetable pads, and we're running big fat 1 inch spacers because we've got some SSR EXC mesh going on this car, but they're like a +20 offset, so it makes it pretty much perfect. 350-pound springs. We're going to keep it fairly soft on this car, a little bit more Grand Tour than all-out track rat, as you can tell. Moving on to the rear. Nothing too complicated back here. Another Adco. We're going to be upgrading the shocks in the relatively near future here, but ST springs for now should give us the right height we want. Might be too soft, we'll see. Might be good with the new springs. So we also can tell that we've got all poly bushings in the entire subframe as well. Everywhere, everything's poly in the back. This is all the Super Pro stuff. I've got the Raptor stuff for my car. They're very similar. So, camber brackets. Oh boy, where to begin on camber brackets? Let me get underneath real quick here. If you've been following the threads, the standard correction that we've all been running, the camber mod, is only really good for at most an 1.5 inch drop. ST springs are like 2 inch when they're brand new. So there's a huge percentage of people out there that the camber mod just straight up doesn't work for. And beyond the fact that you can't adjust to the right height you want, you also get massive bind on the inner arm. This guy, especially once you go poly, when we had it adjusted like to the normal install to account for a 1.5 inch drop on the stand, we couldn't by hand actually bend the arm. Like it was stuck in one position. So how bad the bind was. So after much trial and error, what we did, if you take a look closely here, is we took the standard Raptor brackets and we mounted them way lower than everybody else does. We went right through this sidewall and just cut that right out, dropped it down. It was like 3/8 of an inch on this side, I think, about 1/4 on the inside. Then we added all this reinforcement plate to make it strong again. So by bringing it down this far, you can take a look at how it is.